Hello, my rockers. This is part 3 of the interview with Nigel Wingrove. For the first two parts, check the description and you will find links there. And now let's get down to business. So it's recording, and next question is how did you come up with your brand names Redemption Films and Salvation Films, and why did you choose them, and what meaning or even a message did you put in them?
Well, that was fairly straightforward because when I started Redemption, which was 1992, believe it or not, it was because Visions of Ecstasy, my short film, had got banned by the British government. So, which was in 1989, 1990, and on a personal thing, for me, my income, my money, if you like, whatever I had, came from designing magazines and working as an art director. That's what I did, basically. And I had started to, so I worked on quite big, magazines like in France, Actuel, in London, the Sunday Times, things like that sometimes, and also a lot of computer, magazines like Nursing Times. My main job was basically redesigning magazines. If a magazine wanted the new look, I came in. That's what I did basically. But I also did sort of more non-commercial stuff like Skin 2 magazine, which was a fetish magazine, which I redesigned and created their logo and all that sort of stuff. And people have said, make the images I was creating for them as well. People said, you should start to make these move. So I made a short film called Axel, which is about 10 minutes long, which a girl called Danielle Dax did the music for and things. And I released that on video, and it sold well enough that I got my money back. And, and I made another one, which was Visions of Ecstasy, which was around inspired by, I think it's the best way of putting it, the visions of the Carmelite nun, Saint Teresa, and that was the one, unfortunately, that got me into trouble. And the soundtrack for that, by the way, was done by Steve Severin from Susan the Banshees. So when that got banned, I lost a lot of money because I couldn't get my money back. Which is how I'd done it with Axel. And also, this was around 1989, 1990. In the UK, and I think generally we went into a recession, and that meant that a lot of the magazine type work that I would normally get stopped, because obviously when there's a recession, publishers are cutting back, and they don't spend money on creating new magazines or new looks for magazines. So I wasn't quite sure what to do, and I was also getting a bit bored doing magazines. I love magazines, but I just kind of had enough, and because nothing much, everything was very quiet. I don't know why I decided to, but I looked at, I kind of decided basically that if I couldn't make my own films, then I could perhaps release the films I liked. And, I liked horror films. I liked sort of kind of strange, unusual films and things. So I thought I'd start a film label. I had absolutely no idea how you did that or anything. I just managed to get about £10,000 together, and I went down to the British Film Institute and saw somebody there and said, how do I get a film? How do I license a film? And that was it basically. I licensed Mario Bava's Mask of Satan and Lisa and the Devil, and the one I really wanted, Salon Kitty and Killer Nun. And I wanted a name for the label, and I came up with Redemption because Visions of Ecstasy was banned for blasphemy. And it just felt appropriate. Redemption it felt like a good name to me, and I created the logo, the white-eyed face and everything. And I used I couldn't get, it's one of the criticisms I often get with some sort of purist film fans, why don't you use, pictures from the films, which is my original aim. But I quickly discovered that some films didn't have any stills, or the people supplying me the film had very poor stills. And I couldn't get, and because as I say, I have a design background, I couldn't get the continuity I wanted, which is why I decided to, create the images myself to reflect the film. which actually was a big success. That's why Redemption works. A lot of people the shops automatically put the films all together and created a Redemption section rather than listing them alphabetically. They put them all together. So I had very quickly had Redemption sections in shops and so on. So Redemption worked, and I then launched a sister label called, which again was more sexploitation films. And I wanted another name. And I, of course, having had Redemption, which of course has biblical religious overtones, and I wanted something more female or more sexual, but still with the religious overtones, I chose Jezebel. So Jezebel, from the Bible. So Jezebel became the sister label to Redemption, if you like. You had Redemption, Jezebel. And then a few years later in 96 or 97, when 96 it would have been, I saw Michael Nin's film Latex, and decided there was some really interesting, something exciting happening in the world of pornography, if you like. And I started the third label, and that was Purgatory, again, because again, the religious thing, but it worked with that. And then we had a big legal battle, a major legal battle, and Redemption, I got into a big dispute with a big distributor, and Redemption was locked into that dispute. So I had to find a way out of it, and that's why I created Salvation, again, because Salvation offers hope and stuff. So Salvation became like the company, if you like, rather than a label. Salvation became a sort of company, and it grew from there. And I think the last label in the sort of traditional sense that I launched was Sacrament, which became for the Japanese ones. So basically I had Redemption, Jezebel, Purgatory, Salvation being the kind of company, and then Sacrament. We obviously Satanic Sluts, Ghoul Girls, which is something we played around with, and Carnal, which is another sort of lesbian label. They're sort of slightly off that, but the core labels, they're all religious basically, and it all came because of what happened to Visions of Ecstasy and the fact that I was in quite a difficult position, and seeking redemption seemed appropriate, really.
Okay, it's nice. So redemption symbolizes more like a redemption from the past problems, like something,
yes,
like a new start.
Yes,
it's nice that it's not just exploiting.
No, it was very personal to me. It was very personal to me when I did that.
It's actually a meaningful title. Okay, next question. One can assume that sexploitation cinema is dead because of the abundance and availability of porn streaming websites such as Pornhub that are much more efficient in satisfying the need for sexual content than films with a storyline. Even plot-based hardcore porn seems to have become outdated today. However, I see that your labels constantly release new modern exploitation films, in which I sometimes notice famous porn stars such as Cherie Deville, for example. So what is the state of sexploitation cinema today?
On the sex side, yes, I agree with you. You would think that the easy availability of hardcore porn through Pornhub, X-Hamster, all these umpteen free sites would have killed any market for porn, basically. I mean, in the sense of why would somebody pay for a film on DVD or video or not video, but DVD or Blu-ray or whatever, when they can just go click and they can watch porn online. Well, that was what I would have said as well. But I've been amazed over maybe this is specific to the UK. I'm not completely sure on this, so I don't want to generalise. But certainly in the UK, where I obviously that's where our main business is. With pornography, or with we release a lot of hardcore films. I think people don't realise in the UK. And I was responsible for this change of the law, but pornography was illegal. I mean, when I released Latex originally in 1996, it was illegal to release it in a hardcore version. I could only legally release it as a what the Americans called the sort of, not softcore, but it was softcore, but the cable version, because that meant what the Americans used to put in hotels and stuff, which was cut down. And I would have to submit, in the UK, you cannot release a film legally unless it's been classified by the British Board of Film Classification. So it's illegal, I mean, punishable, with fines or something, if you release a film or distribute a film without having it classified, and you have to pay money to have it classified. So a 90-minute film will cost £600 or £700 for the British Census to say, yes, you can. This is a certificate you have, 15, 18, whatever. Or they may say you can release this film at 18, but first you have to cut this, cut that, and cut that. So that's essentially the way that the law works in the UK. Now, I've challenged that law several times in court, and it cost me a lot of money to do it. But with pornography, when I came to release latex, it was illegal. There was no, hardcore was illegal, basically. You could not release hardcore. You couldn't import the hardcore into the UK, even to submit it to the censors. It could not come into the UK. I mean, if you brought it in, you were breaking the law, like importing drugs. It was illegal. You couldn't do it. We had some films sent to us, which we hadn't asked for, but hardcore films, and customs in the UK stopped those films, seized those films. And then I had to go and see customs, and I was warned in the presence of my lawyers that we had broken the law, but they accepted that we hadn't asked for those films to come in. We explained that we had a new company, Purgatory, and that we wanted to release these adult, films. And the customs people said, well, you can't bring them in. You can bring in a softcore, but you couldn't bring in a hardcore. And so we asked if the films could be sent directly to the censors. They wouldn't come to me; they'd go straight from the, whoever was sending them to us, straight to the government, which is a government body. Don't forget, the British Board of Film Censors is part of the government. It's not like Anyway, they said no, you couldn't do that, because if they went to the British Board of Film Censors, they would also the police would go to them, and arrest them, or seize the film. So we had to take it to court. I think I might have discussed this before, but basically, we started a legal action against the censors, and we ran out of money, because this was about the fourth legal case I'd had in as many years. But some other companies helped me to help my case. They also had a business in this area. And anyway, kind of long story short, after lots of legal battles in the year 2000, pornography was legalized, not by the government saying, oh, we should legalize it because everybody else in the world seems to have legal pornography. They legalized it because they lost in court. They had no choice. They had to legalize it. So that was basically what happened with the law. So from that point onwards, hardcore pornography was legal in the UK. But I suppose, as a way of the government sort of saving face, they said that you could only buy hardcore films from a licensed sex shop. So if you wanted to buy the latex, for example, in the hardcore version, you couldn't order it from me, and I couldn't send it to you through the post. You had to walk into a licensed sex shop, and if they had a copy, they could sell it to you. You can go home and watch it. That was legal. You could also order it from America, and it could be posted into you. That was legal. But a distributor like ourselves, we couldn't put it into HMV, which is the main retailer in the UK for sale. That would be illegal, because the HMV is not a licensed sex shop. It could only be sold in licensed sex shops. And that in turn created a monopoly for the sex shops, which means they could charge whatever they like for pornography, but they could pay people like us, the distributors, almost nothing, because we couldn't go anywhere else. So they could say, okay, we'll pay you £3 for this film. We're going to sell it for £20. We'll give you £3. And if you don't like it, fuck off, because there was nowhere else we could go. We couldn't sell it mail order. We couldn't sell it on the internet. We couldn't do anything. So what happened was, over the course of about 4 years after pornography was legalized, all the independent distributors went out of business or stopped doing. We stopped as well, because there was no way we could make any money. And so the only people who made money were the people who owned the sex shops, and because they had a monopoly. And then they licensed pornography, and there were two companies, and they basically would stock each other's product, but nobody else's. And everybody else was killed, put out of business. In any other business, that would be illegal. But in the UK, that was sanctioned, not deliberately, but it was an indirect result of the legislation when the government legalized pornography. So to fast forward to now, what that meant was that people like me, if we wanted to sell latex in HMV, which is our main retailer, or on Amazon or anywhere else, we can still only sell the softcore version. We can't sell the hardcore version. So most people, including us, stopped releasing hardcore films softcore versions for hardcore films, because we thought there's no market. Nobody's going to want to watch the softcore version of a film, whether it's latex or any other film, because they can go online and see hardcore pornography, And we've asked the British Board of Film Censors to change the law so that we could, because obviously that law was done in the year 2000. In the last 20 years, the internet's exploded, and the whole thing of, we should be able to sell hardcore films through mail order, things like that. It would make sense. Anyway, they can't do it. It would take an act of the government, which could change the law, and the government have no interest. So that's as it is. So basically, we'd pretty much stopped releasing films like latex on DVD at 18, which is with the softcore version, because we thought nobody would buy them. And anyway, about when we started the latest sort of version of Redemption or Salvation, or my labels, basically, we started it in 2014 or 2013. We sort of revamped the whole look, and we had a new sort of packaging and everything. And I thought, well, I thought I'll put out latex and a few of them, but these at 18. And much to my amazement, they sold really well. So we started adding more. And then we did a deal, with, obviously we released the Japanese films, but we also released films like Luna's Angels, a lot of Italian product, obviously it's dubbed into English, and they're hardcore films, but they're story-led. And we released Diary of a Secretary, Luna's Angels, The Order, various full-length porn films, but story-led. We released them on DVD, but obviously in the softcore versions. And much to my amazement, they've sold really well, really well. And so we released more, and they're still selling really well. And so we started putting out some of the older releases that we previously released, and we had old stock of. We've sold it, and they've sold really well. So there is an interest. I don't know whether that's because some people just don't like looking at pornography on the internet, therefore they would rather buy the DVDs. But we make, whatever the reason, there does seem to be a market. And I've also noticed that there are companies in the US now, ironically enough, funded indirectly by the people that own Pornhub, that are now making story-led hardcore science fiction films, good ones as well, very high quality dramas. And there are quite a few US and European, well, primarily US, but I think some European ones as well, that are making these story-led porn again. And they're they vary, obviously, but in general, they're not badly acted. They're quite well scripted, very high production values. So there's some good stuff coming out again. So it's interesting. And from my experience over the last 4 years, given the amount that we sell of softcore, there is a market both for story-led pornography, because essentially, if you want porn, you go like that and you have porn. And maybe people, because people can see the sexual act anywhere, the click of a button, having something that's more nuanced and more interesting, in a sense, is perhaps more erotic as well. So I think it's changing. I mean, the funny thing with the porn industry is it's evolving all the time. It's always changing. And if there's a market, if people will pay money for story-led porn, then they'll make it. It's as simple as that.
Okay, very interesting.
It's a very long
Thank you.
your question. I'm sorry, but it was it was trying to explain the UK's unusual. It's not like France or say Germany, where pornography has pretty much been legal since 1970, which is 50 years. We've only had legal pornography for 20 years, and as I say, it was not brought about because the government thought we should be like the same as the rest of the world. It was brought about because they lost in court multiple times, and where they only became legal not because they ran out of being able to fight it. They literally couldn't. There was no other way legally they could stop it.
They lost in court multiple times to you or maybe to other companies?
They lost multiple times. I started the legal action, but then we ran out of money. So there's two other companies there weren't many companies involved in distributing porn in the UK at that time, but the two companies that were, because when I began the legal action, it highlighted the fact that the British Bureau for Film Classification at that time were allowing a certain amount of hardcore at the classification for sex shops is called R18, which means restricted 18. The normal classification for everywhere else is an 18, but the R18 or restricted 18, which was only then softcore, means they could only be bought in a licensed sex shop. And the British Board of Film Classification at that stage were just, in a very sort of British way, in a sort of silly British way, allowing as an experiment a little bit of hardcore, if I can put it like that. I mean, we had a meeting with them about latex, for example, where they said they could show an erection for a certain number of seconds on screen, but they could not show, oh my God, ejaculation. They could not show that, but they might be able to show penetration from a distance. I mean, all this nonsense. And we were trying to work out how to work with them, this day, because we had no choice. This was the way they were. But of course, we needed to get the films that we wanted them to look at into the country. And this is why we had the trouble. We had to clarify it. We had to get the British Board of Film Classification to tell Customs and Excise that they were allowing some of this material. So what happened was that when some films came in, Customs stopped them, and we had to ask the Customs said that the British Board of Film Classification had to write to them to tell them that they had a change of policy. Eventually, after our lawyers asked and asked and asked, they did that. They wrote to the British Board of Film Classification, informed formally the HMR, the Customs and Excise, basically, that they were allowing a little bit of porn in some films. But then they had to tell the Home Secretary, who has responsibility for all of this, which was a man at that time. The Labour government had just won the election, and the new Home Secretary was a man called Jack Straw, and he was suddenly informed of this, and he went mad. I mean, basically, not mad. He was furious because the British Board of Film Classification were in a sense not legalising pornography, but they were allowing a little bit of pornography without telling the Home Secretary. And the person with responsibility for all of this was the Home Secretary, so he went mad. And basically what he said was all adult, strong adult material stops. So that's why we had brought my lawyers had brought action against them to clarify the law. When the Home Secretary found out what was going on, he stopped everything. And it meant the other two companies that owned some of the sex shops and were the main people distributing softcore material that are stronger than normal softcore, they couldn't do any business. They were stopped. So they then came to me, and then they took over my case to clarify the law, because none of us could do any business. Everything was stopped. So they took it over, and it took, 2 years. They won a case, the government appealed, there was another case, another case, another case. It went on like that for the space of 2 years. And then suddenly I got a phone call, and they said, we've won. Would I go on Channel 4 News, which is one of the main UK news things, that evening, because we'd rather you did it than us. So I had to go on, and the next day, literally, pornography was legal in the UK. It just happened like that. So it was very, that was the way it was. I think most people in the UK assumed that pornography, that if you went into a sex shop, that pornography was legal, but actually, obviously, because most people didn't go to sex shops, but actually it wasn't, and it never had been, and I think the government thought when it was legalized that the world would collapse, the world would end, but because it actually made it made no difference. It was a very quiet. It changed. The law changed, and nobody thought anything of it. It just sort of. I think also because the internet was even in 2000, the internet was beginning to take off much more rapidly in the early noughties with consumers, and of course pornography was on there, and it kind of it just, the world didn't collapse. I think up until that point, pornography was something most English people hadn't seen because it wasn't legal, but they hadn't really thought about it. And if they had thought about it, they just assumed it was legal in sex shops. They didn't, because most people didn't care either way. But the internet changed that. Because with the internet, with more consumers, like average people, using the internet, which is what happened in the noughties. It moved from being just a limited number of people on the internet, to becoming a mass thing. And when it became a mass thing, most of the population obviously saw porn, and it, as I say, the world didn't collapse, and that was that.
And at present, are there any still any limitations to physical releases about how much?
Well, the limitations are that still, because the law hasn't been touched since it changed in the year 2000. So if you wanted to buy a DVD or a Blu-ray with hardcore material on it, you can still only buy it in a licensed sex shop. You cannot, and this is the big thing, you cannot order it and buy it by mail order. It's illegal, technically. I'm not saying it would be enforced, but technically it's illegal to send an R18. So if somebody's in Manchester and they want, and they ordered a porn film from America, that's legal. If they ordered a porn film from somebody selling it in Birmingham or something, that's illegal, because you're not allowed to send or sell an R18 or a pornographic video or DVD or Blu-ray, whatever, through the post. You can only walk into a sex shop and buy it and walk out again. And the law has the reason they did that originally, because they said, oh, children might get access to it. But of course now, technology, to the internet, nobody under 18 is going to buy a DVD. You know what I mean? It's not going to happen. So the law should be changed, but there's no demand for it. The sex shops, not many people buy hardcore DVDs in the sex shops anyway. The sex shops mainly sell sex toys now, and fetish clothing and things like that. The porn DVD market or porn Blu-ray market is tiny now, because most consumers aren't going to a sex shop to buy a porn DVD. They're going on, they watch it online, so the law's almost redundant. I mean, it should be changed, but the only people that can change it is the government, and there's no demand. There's no demand. I mean, and if I wanted it to change, I would have to go to my local MP. I mean, my local, politician that represents me. I would then have to ask him or her to bring a piece of private legislation to the House of Commons, and then it would have to be a private member. It's ridiculous how long this could take, and the money and everything else. And I can't see any. And then it would have to go before the Home Secretary, and it's incredibly complicated how laws in the UK have changed. So the only other way it would happen is if it was just people were just doing it and nobody cared, a bit like cannabis or something. Lots of young people smoke cannabis, nobody cares. It would be something like that, and nobody would bother, and it would just eventually become a law that nobody enforces. But because nobody's really selling or buying porn DVDs anyway, it's not really an issue. Nobody cares.
But there are no limitations for online streaming. So if you
you can stream. That's the legislation doesn't cover streaming. So yes, you can stream material, but you can't. It's the physical media that's restricted, because that was the way that the legislation was worded when the law changed. It doesn't, and the British Board of Film Classification have no jurisdiction over streaming material. So streaming is not exempt, it's the wrong word, but it's separate from this legislation.
Okay, so that's another opportunity for Redemption TV to have more freedom.
Yes, it's not something we've moved into yet, because the Redemption TV site is, we want to keep it like relatively mainstream and non-pornographic, because obviously most of our stuff is the Japanese pink cinema and the redemptions of horror stuff. And we would like to get the channel onto Amazon Prime. So obviously, if we had pornography on it, that wouldn't be allowed. So if we wanted to do porn, we would have to have. We wouldn't have to have, but I would have a separate site, purgatory site, if you like. That would be, to keep the two separate, basically.
Okay. Let's move to another question. Can you recommend any modern directors and production studios specializing in sexploitation and other subgenres of exploitation films today?
No, I mean, I could, off the top of my head, I could. There is a lot of stuff I'm seeing being made. Honestly, because I didn't have a chance to look it up, there are some Canadian and American companies I know making some very interesting porn stuff, but I haven't got. I'd have to send you an email with the names on. You can add them to the thing later on, because there is some good material out there. And there are some. We get sent interesting material all the time. I mean, I do see stuff that I like all the time. It's just that I don't want to single somebody out particularly and then forget somebody else. So what I'll do is I'll send you an email with some names and some links, because there are some directors I would recommend to you, and there are some adult production companies that I think are making some good stuff. I just need to look them up again rather than getting the names wrong or making a mess of myself.
How about maybe horror films that are also exploitation, not necessarily sex?
Again, the same thing applies. I mean, we're releasing films that are on Redemption TV now that I think that are coming through, including one of your colleagues, the one the Savage Dance and all these things. So there's some interest. I mean, I'm always looking at new work when it comes through, and the nice thing with the streaming side is that our production costs, I mean, the thing is to get a film out even on DVD, not Blu-ray, that in the UK, because we have to pay £600, £700, £800 even to the British Board of Classification just to get the certificate, and then we have to pay for the mastering and all that stuff. So to get a film on the shelf is about £2,000, £1,500, £2,000 minimum on DVD. More if it's Blu-ray, obviously, but in the UK we do DVD. So whereas with the streaming, we have to pay for the MPEG-4, obviously, but that's tiny money compared to that. And then of course it's available. So it's a huge difference, and it makes it so much easier for us to just release or show or screen or support obscure films or the films that people don't know at that stage, that we can put out. Obviously our aim is to put some of them out on physical media as well, because it's a slightly different market, but nonetheless it's one of the advantages of the streaming side. It's not nearly as expensive. It makes it much easier for us.
Okay. I know one modern director, very interesting one, and I want to ask you if you know him. Have you seen films by Cosmotropia de Xam? I see a slight similarity in his films to yours because of the soundtracks with heavy and spooky synthesizers and overall nightmarish feel. I asked him, by the way, and he confirmed that your films and overall redemption style influenced his own. Among other things, I mean, influenced his own style among other things, including exploitation cinema itself. So do you know his films? And if yes, what do you think about them?
Well, in answer to your question, I actually didn't know his films until you said until you drew them to my attention. But I think they look fantastic, and I watched some of them on YouTube, or some examples of his work on YouTube and on the site.
From the water you came out of dust, as it was told by the prophecy of Baba Yaga. The earth will move. 3 elements will flow into a new one. The yet unborn will live. Dracula. Blood will fall from the sky. With the blood, also the cross, as Baba Yaga has foreseen it. Great power will come.
And I immediately liked the presentation, the overall packaging style. I liked very much the examples I saw, and I like also the ones I saw. The sound or the music was quite confrontational, quite sort of noisy. But what I was seeing, I liked, and in fact, I would very much like to put some of them onto Redemption TV, as well, if he wanted to talk to me about that, or we could do a deal. I thought they were great, and I really support. I really admire somebody that can make a film anyway, and that's. I think anybody makes a film, even good or bad. The fact that somebody makes the effort to put something together, I think is to be commended. But the fact is, his stuff actually look very good. But also that not just that he does that, but that he's created a brand, of his work, and that he's actually releasing them onto himself, and presumably making some, getting his money back, because he's made quite a lot there, and so unless he's very rich, he's got, he's obviously created a brand that's self-financing. Presumably, he makes a film, gets some money in, makes another one, So I think, great, well done. So I was very impressed, basically.
Okay. Have you heard about witch house music and subculture movement? Imagery from the 70s and the 80s exploitation horror films is often used in it. If you have, what do you think about it?
Again, I hadn't heard of it until you mentioned it to me, and I had, when I initially saw it from you, and I Googled it, until I investigated more, I immediately had preconceptions of what it was like, because I assumed, in the past I did some videos for an English band called Cathedral, but the guy that Dorian, who was the lead singer, I think, of Cathedral, he also has a record label, Rise Above Records, I think it is, and they do a lot of doom metal and sort of retro metal now with bands that use a lot of samples from horror films, and they take dialogue and all kinds of stuff like that. And I thought wrongly that Witch House would be stuff like that, and of course it wasn't. So when I looked into it more, it was much more interesting than that. And of course I was curious whether the Witch House was to do with like house music and the techno thing, or whether it was a reference to a Lovecraft story called Witch House, but I wasn't sure which is which. Anyway, whatever. I thought it was, again, it looked very interesting to me. I hadn't, the only band that was cited in Wikipedia, which was Crystal Castle, which I know because they've been around for a long time, but the rest of the artists and performers and stuff were new to me. So I'm still exploring it, because it's only been a week, and I did actually speak to several other people. And nobody had heard of it. I spoke to Finders Keepers, the record label that does our John Roland films, and they hadn't heard of it. So it was interesting to me. I do gather that it's been very small and kind of a niche thing that's been going on since about 2009, 2010, and it stayed relatively small. And then I saw an article in Vice from the end of last year, which said that it was still going on, but perhaps under different names, and they said it was influence on Billie Eilish and stuff, people like her, which might twig with her kind of darker videos before she got more, became more very successsul. But I don't know. I found it very interesting, basically, and I'd be interested also if the sort of redemptionist general overall aesthetic, which obviously comes from me, has been an influence. So I'd like that, and I also again, like with I can't pronounce his name. Your colleague you mentioned before, the filmmaker.
Cosmotropia de Xam.
Yes, there's a simpler way for abbreviate that for me. But anyway, that's I again with Witch House, I found it quite. I found it quite exciting actually, and I was very interested in it. So I'd like to see more of it and look more in. At the moment, I've only listened to some compilations on YouTube and had a look at some of the artists that are referenced and stuff like that. The only one I was familiar, and in fact I bought some of their material, is Crystal Castle, was the only one, and they've been around for about 20 years now.
As far as I know, Cosmotropia de Xam was the one who launched this sub-trend within Witch House that uses the imagery from the 70s exploitation cinema, because he's a huge fan of this genre.
Although I noticed that the packaging on the YouTube compilations and stuff, I mean, they have a lot of what I would say was imagery that kind of is quite redemption-esque, if I can say it, like with nuns or lots of inverted crosses and stuff, and girls in the woods with antlers or whatever, it's all sort of imagery that I'm, that I'm very familiar with, or is kind of associated with that. But I was also much more as interested in also in the music and what the scene sounded like, basically, which I liked. And again, wasn't what I was expecting.
Okay. Do you have any other projects that you are currently working on or have in mind for the future, apart from your paintings and growing Redemption TV?
Yes and no. I mean, it's difficult. It's for everybody, it's a difficult time, but it's an interesting time. I mean, as I say, we have our releases, on DVD and Blu-ray, and the same in America. I think the Redemption TV's interests me because it's global. It's very instant. We're adding say 2 films every week, and that's, if it works and if we start to generate money. I think the next area that we would go in terms of redemption is, and again, it's something I've always wanted to do, and it's which is to create more of a brand, which means we can start to play around with areas into fashion and I don't know, dolls and all sorts. I mean, all just general stuff, but which we would need some spare cash to sort of develop. So that would be, and that's been like an ambition for me ever since I started Redemption. So that would be interesting. We've got a kind of online stroke magazine thing I'm putting together. I'm a bit slow because that's kind of indulgence for me, because I just enjoy doing magazines and graphics and stuff. So that's something that will come out intermittently. But the main thing, I think, if we have the capacity or in terms of money to do it, would be starting to create more physical for product, basically, that would be a kind of outside of video and DVD, or DVD and Blu-ray rather, but it would be, as I say, not merchandise so much, but actual objects, things, that would have a redemption horror feel, but they would be, they would be something new. We'd start to sort of build more of that, like a lifestyle thing around redemption. I think that's something I've always wanted to do. So whether that will happen, I don't know. But it's an ambition for me, and it's one that hasn't become reality yet, for me.
Okay, thanks, Nigel. I'm looking forward to the further growth of Redemption TV and, in general, redemption films, salvation films. Thank you for this interview. I will leave the links in the description to this video to Nigel's projects, Redemption TV, for example, particularly to Redemption TV, so that you will be able to visit it, watch your favorite films, and discover new films. And for now, see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.